because I was writing it in a notebook, and I was very often in public places, like cafes or trains or planes, and I just started giggling when people would look at me. And it's really hard to explain. I just realized that our hero's just been rescued by a time-traveling stegosaurus in a hot air balloon who is convinced that he's in the far future. And my hero is trying to explain to him, no, there are pirates around, so we're in the past, and they're getting all confused. And it's basically about a dad who sets out to go and get milk for his children's cereal, and is delayed coming back. And when he gets back, they're like, where were you? You got talking to Mr. Ronson again, didn't you? He said, no, not at all. Actually, it was, he explains how he got beamed up onto an alien spaceship. These green globby aliens who plan to redecorate the Earth. And they're going to do evil things, like replace Australia with a huge decorative plate with a picture of Australia on it. So, anyway, it's ridiculous.
When is that out?
September. From Bloomsbury. It's very, very silly and incredibly extensively illustrated by Chris Riddell. So that was probably the most fun I've ever had, writing something.
So we'll just have these last two quick questions, and then you're going to do a last reading.
Last one?
Just one.
Yes, because the person standing behind the person with the question was standing there to make sure nobody else got in line. It was brilliantly and elegantly executed.
You've talked about myths and story space, and in American gods, the gods survive on worship. How much do storytellers create religion by pulling down new myths?
Oh, I don't know. I know that the storytellers create stories. I love the idea that a lot of the stories that we wind up with started out as religion, started out as sacred things. And then you start out with sacred mysteries, and then they rot down a little bit and become myths. And then they rot down and become fairy stories. Just like, I was telling people yesterday, which I put a thing in The Guardian about it. Do you know there are myths about Jesus? Anybody here know? Have you ever heard of the gospel of the infancy of Christ? Thomas's gospel. It's great fun. It's basically all of the stories, it's the adventures of Jesus Christ when he was a boy. And it's from about the 2nd or 3rd century. He makes clay birds, brings them to life. At one point, a kid is knocked off the roof and dies, so Jesus just brings him back to life. Because he's accused of having knocked him off the roof, and the kid goes, it wasn't Jesus, it was him. He does all these sort of effective, 7-year-old miracles. But he also keeps killing people. Anybody who pisses him off gets it. Sometimes they just go blind. There's a teacher who raises his hand to strike him, whose arm just withers, obviously. But normally they don't. And there's a point in there where Joseph says to Mary, if he's going to keep killing people like this, we're going to have to stop him going out of the house. And then, myths then become stories. But of course, the truth is that the religions begin, most of them, we assume, with fantastic stories. And they begin with storytellers saying, this wasn't always here, this land. Once upon a time, a huge bird came and shat. And that's our secret, because we're the Raven tribe. And that's where it all begins. So yes.
Well, a great note to end on. Well, thank you, everybody. And you're just... Thanks for the questions, everybody. We're just going to round things off now with another reading from The Ocean at the End of the Lane.
So we're a little bit later in the book. And our hero woke up with a coin in his throat. And he's now gone with Letty Hemstock to her farm. I said to Letty, I'm scared. She smiled at me. I'll make sure you're safe, I promise. I'm not scared. I was still scared, but not as much. It's just scary. I said, I promise, said Letty Hemstock, I won't let you be hurt. Hurt? Said a high, cracked voice. Who's hurt? What's been hurt? Why would anybody be hurt? It was old Mrs. Hemstock, her apron held between her hands, and in the hollow of the apron so many daffodils that the light reflected up from them transformed her face to gold, and the kitchen seemed bathed in yellow light. Letty said, something's causing trouble. It's giving people money in their dreams and in real life. She showed the old lady my shilling. My friend found himself choking on this shilling when he woke up this morning. Old Mrs. Hemstock put her apron on the kitchen table, rapidly moved the daffodils off the cloth and onto the wood. Then she took the shilling from Letty. She squinted at it, sniffed it, rubbed at it, listened to it, or put it to her ear, at any rate, then touched it with the tip of her purple tongue. It's new, she said at last. It says 1912 on it, but it didn't exist yesterday. Letty said, I knew there was something funny about it. I looked up at old Mrs. Hemstock. How do you know? Good question, lovey. It's electron decay, mostly. You have to look at things closely to see the electrons. They're the little dinky ones that look like tiny smiles. The neutrons are the grey ones that look like frowns. The electrons were all a bit too smiley for 1912, so then I checked the sides of the letters in the old king's head, and everything was a tad too sharp and crisp, even where they was worn. It was as if they'd been made to be worn. You must have very good eyesight, I told her. I was impressed. She gave me back the coin. Not as good as it once was, but then when you get to be my age, your eyesight won't be as sharp as it once was neither. And she let out a guffaw as if she'd said something very funny. How old is that? Letty looked at me. And I was worried that I'd said something rude. Sometimes adults didn't like to be asked their ages, and sometimes they did. In my experience, old people did. They were proud of their ages. Mrs. Wallery was 77, and Mr. Wallery was 89, and they liked telling us how old they were. Old Mrs. Hemstock went over to a cupboard and took out several colourful vases. Old enough, she said. I remember when the moon was made. Hasn't there always been a moon? Bless you, not in the slightest. I remember the day the moon came. We looked up in the sky. It was all dirty brown and sooty grey here, then not green and blue. She half filled each of the vases at the sink. Then she took a pair of blackened kitchen scissors and snipped off the bottom half-inch of stem from each of the daffodils. I said, are you sure it's not that man's ghost doing this? Are you sure we aren't being haunted? They both laughed then, the girl and the old woman, and I felt stupid. I said, sorry. Ghosts can't make things, said Letty. They aren't even good at moving things. Old Mrs. Hemstock said, go and get your mother. She's doing laundry. Then to me, you shall help me with the daffs. I helped her put the flowers into the vases, and she asked my opinion on where to put the vases in the kitchen. We placed them where I suggested, and I felt wonderfully important.
Well, it's a wonderful
Please be seated just for a moment. I'm just going to run through a few things which should make the rest of the evening possibly the best event you've ever been to. Because Neil's here and the whole event run very smoothly. Now, as I suspect all of you here have paid for a ticket, Your ticket gives you money off the book. Most of them are £10, which means the book's £6.99. Now, some of you have trains to catch. We do have signed copies in front of the shop, and they've elegantly banded and wrapped with elf-like beauty. Look at this, banded and wrapped. So, the train to catch, the signed copies at the front. He will sign some copies for people. Only person has one copy, and only the new book. We would really like to have the first pre-tour event, and it's a fantastic start. So let's just not abuse that trust in having this, and have such a big, fantastic event. Now, all queues are horrible, and it's always unfair in some ugly fashion. And we British people, we hate queuing. So in a very democratic fashion, a very topping fashion, we're going to have 4 queues. 1, 2, 3, and microphone. 4. So we'll feed people through slowly and fairly. Everyone will get a meeting that way. There's not going to be a massive scrum. So please, let's make it the best organised event. It's been fantastic so far. Jake's been brilliant. You've been fantastic. But above all, Neil has been brilliant. A wonderful start to the tour.